Hey, IB Environmental students. Today we're going to be talking about pollution, topic 5. First, let's define pollution. It is the addition to an environment of a substance or an agent by human activity. That human activity piece is really important, and we would need it when we're trying to be detailed in our definition. And it is at a rate greater than which could be rendered harmless by the environment. That is also important, meaning there's nothing filtering it out or somehow it's not biodegrading in some way, so it's sticking around. Last, which it is also having an appreciable effect on the organisms, meaning we can noticeably see the impact it's having on the flora and fauna, the organisms within the environment. For a full point definition on an exam, you would need all three of those parts. All right, let's next talk about the two major categories of pollution. There are point source, things that have a specific point or source, and non-point source pollutants. Let's give some examples. A point source pollutant would be something like a factor. I could easily figure out what is the toxin maybe coming out of that factory and where it's coming from. However, non-point source would be something like car emissions or water washing down the road. It's hard to figure out exactly what lawn the fertilizer or pollutants in the water would be coming from, or it's hard in car emissions to figure out where exactly the exhaust is coming from, especially if it's getting blown away somewhere. So which do you think is harder to control or easier to control through legislation? Specifically answering this question about easier, the one that's easier to control is one where we can actually pinpoint the polluter, right? So the point source pollutant. The non-point source pollutant is really difficult to figure out where and how and what to do about enforcement issues through legislation, and we'll get to that more later. All right. Our last subtopic is going to be the major sources of pollution, and here they are, the 5 major sources. We're going to talk about each of them in detail. Let's begin. So let's do combustion of fossil fuels first. When we talk about this, here are the pollutants: carbon dioxide, CO2, sulfur dioxide, also known as SOx, nitric oxides, NOx, and photochemical smog. We're going to have a whole mini unit within topic 5 on air pollution, so we'll talk about these more in detail. Just get them down now. There are some major things that we would think about for effects. Greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore the greenhouse effect and climate change would be related to these, as well as acid deposition. Now, some of these are more one than the other, and we'll talk about that more as we continue on forward, thinking about these specific pollutants more in the later parts of topic 5. All right, let's keep going. Domestic waste. Domestic meaning household waste. Some major pollutants could be organic waste, your food, your sewage, your poos, right? So that being said, your paper, your plastic, anything that you're putting into the trash can, right? So when we are doing an IA potentially later, the solid domestic waste IA, you will be collecting your trash. These could also be things that potentially could have been compostable or recyclable. So what are the effects of these sorts of waste? They could sometimes promote eutrophication, which we'll talk about later in the unit. They could cause waterborne diseases. They're going to build in our landfills and take up space. And because they take up space, often we have to deforest areas either to make the items or to take up space for landfills. And lastly, making these items takes up a lot of energy, and it also can sometimes actually produce energy when we try to burn them, which is something we do in the Fairfax County area to get rid of our trash. So overall, these are things from your household. There are trash and our waste, and we're going to learn in this topic 5 how to reduce these things. Last but not least, effect not properly doing what I was just saying. Okay. Industrial waste, that's going to be your factory sort of waste. Pollutants, heavy metals, fluorides, lead, acid, not so good things. What are the effects of these things? A lot of those things were poisonous. A lot of those things can make solubility of gases like oxygen that we need in the water, especially for our fish to breathe, right? That's going to lower the ability of the fish to get that oxygen. Very sad. Oops. And so, great. And then agricultural waste. Those are going to be our nitrates, really, especially in fertilizers, any sort of organic waste, our pesticides that we're putting, that we learned when we were doing agriculture way back when. What are the effects of those things? Eutrophication again, which we'll talk more about in detail later, spread of disease, and of course some of those things like pesticides such as DDT are bioaccumulators and will affect things up the food chain. Wonderful.